Let's talk about another category, and here this is also the hybrid category, but it's of course a much longer term instrument that you invest in, which is multi-asset. And it's been finding a lot of takers, Mohit. And the reason I want to talk about it today is that we have gold prices that are, even as I speak with you, at all-time highs. And there are a few schemes that have taken oversized exposure to gold. I'm assuming that these are the schemes that have outperformed over the last 1 year. Have you indeed seen that?
Oh, absolutely. I think anyone and everyone who had gold in the portfolio by direct allocation, by virtue of having a multi-asset fund, they have done fantastically well. They have resisted all kinds of market fall. And I think kudos to the industry for coming out with this kind of a combination, which is an automated diversification for investors who really don't have a ball on their asset allocation. So for someone who doesn't want to take active calls between equity, debt, commodity allocation, I think multi-asset serves the purpose. It's a great auto asset allocator kind of a tool. And out there, if you see, there is huge variance amongst funds on what is the equity composition, what is the debt composition, and what is the commodity composition. Even within commodity, you find funds varying a lot between gold and silver. And that's typically given a huge divergence of returns amongst the entire set of funds which we have in the industry.
Okay, let's talk about some of these, right? Because White Oak stands out as a mutual fund scheme, or I'm talking about the multi-asset allocation fund, which has a sizable allocation to gold. Even as last data that you've shared with me, it's about 15.3% allocation to gold, 39 odd percent to debt, 29.4 to equity, none to silver. But this is the reason why it leads the chart with a 1-year return of 14.16%, significantly higher than the sector average. Is that likely to continue? And what are the other schemes? You mentioned a few more. Mirai Asset, for example, you have DSP, you have Quantum, ICICI Pru. ICICI Pru does not have a very large allocation to gold, but it does have allocation to silver. And I guess that's also been a kicker.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So look, Alex, as I said, there is no two doubts that schemes with higher gold composition have done well. But it is a combination of two assets working for you in most of these multi-asset schemes, if you notice very closely. So for White Oak, let's take that example. 15% gold has done phenomenally well, but so has their debt exposure of almost 40 odd percent. They are low on equity. If you see across the multi-asset funds, they are, I think, amongst the lowest on equity composition, which is just 29, and which is the asset class which has actually not performed in last 1 year, right? So that's where the most amount of hit has got come in. But now that the equity is rallying back from last 1 week or 10 days or a month or so, I think the composition of funds which will now lead the charts will change dramatically. Having said which, if the fund manager is active enough and have prudently or timely changed allocation, then that's a different case. We only come to know of that in a hindsight of a month when the portfolios are disclosed. But yes, last 1 year, if you see White Oak with the highest gold allocation and the lowest equity allocation has done phenomenally well. So has DSP with a very high gold allocation and a very different overall equity mix in the portfolio. And Quant also, if you see, the equity allocation is pretty low, but the debt allocation is very high and the gold allocation is steady out there. So these are few schemes which have actually done well, A, because of commodity exposure, and B, because of a higher debt allocation also.
Okay, sorry, were you talking about Quantum?
Quantum, sorry, my bad. Quantum.
Sorry. Okay, so, there's also, incidentally, I spoke about gold yesterday with a commodity analyst, and his advice is perhaps it's time to take money off the table. The kind of run that you've seen in gold is just phenomenal, and I guess it's a symptom of what we're seeing around the world. There's increased uncertainty. But if you have invested in something like a multi-asset, that doesn't mean that you book profits, but you could see a relative underperformance. Is that a possibility if gold cools off very suddenly?
Okay, so
in the schemes, I'm talking about in the schemes that, okay, so what is your opinion on gold? Let me break this down. What is your opinion on gold? And because we've discussed schemes that have higher allocation to gold, if that reverses, could we see a period of underperformance?
Okay, the first part, Alex. Look, I will have to say it with a pinch of salt that the run up in gold has been too soon, too fast, too ferocious to be true. Honestly, any asset class, not just gold, but anything which gives or delivers this kind of a return, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. My only advice out here will be don't get under any FOMO. For any investor, that if they haven't invested in gold so far, please don't jump in at these levels. It's absolutely not a level to increase your allocation in gold or to start afresh right now. These are crazy, insane levels on gold which we are seeing, right? Taking profit off the table out here, yes, if by virtue of asset allocation the composition of gold has actually shot up a lot in your overall portfolio, then you need to rebalance and get it down and trim it down, and this perhaps is the right time to trim it down, right? So not a time to get in. And if you're overweight gold right now, yes, it's the right time to trim down your allocation. That's my call. But if you're underweight, then perhaps just hold on to that allocation, right?
Okay, fair point. And you already mentioned that some of these schemes, if they're active enough, they could, work
Yes.
their allocation and ensure that underperformance is avoided. But come to the final point and what your recommendations in this space would be, because when you're investing in a multi-asset fund, first of all, what is the time horizon that you need? What is the allocation in your portfolio? Because it's not going to do away with your requirement for asset allocation. And what is your objective? It's not return generation, really. It's a combination of multiple factors. You want some capital generation, but you want capital protection as well. So what should your expectation be?
So look, basically the underlying promise or thesis of a multi-asset fund is that there is an automated diversification which an investor need not bother about. If there is an extraordinary volatile movement in any one asset class, the other two asset classes come in handy and kind of preserve the portfolio or hedge it out. So these are some underlying promises, right? And out here we also go with an assumption that the fund manager is active enough to move the allocations. So we typically don't track a good multi-asset fund by virtue of its returns or even by virtue of its composition. We track a good multi-asset fund by virtue of how sharp the movements have been between the asset classes, right? So if someone has been nimble enough to now perhaps trim down commodities and move more towards equity, trim down debt and move more towards equity, that's a good call. And that's a great multi-asset fund. But yes, for investors who are already invested, they need not worry because the whole promise is that the fund manager is doing the right asset allocation. And if he thinks that gold has outrun its rally, then perhaps they will trim down the allocation and move more towards equity or debt as they deem appropriate in the portfolio. So multi-asset fund is a fund for ages. You can continue holding that fund because it is doing all that what an active investor needs to do by himself or herself. So the fund manager is doing that actively for you, and out here the whole premise is that he's taking the right asset allocation moves.
Okay, and you can have an oversized allocation from that perspective if you have a relatively low risk approach, or if you don't want to have an active hand in deciding how much allocation towards asset classes and how much allocation towards within equity as well, market capitalization wise, right? So which type of investor puts a large amount of money into multi-asset?
Typically, look, Alex, multi-asset and balance advantages are these two categories where we've often seen too much of very, very conservative investors, retired investors who are wanting to safeguard their portion of money and not wanting to take too many chances in the portfolio. I think those are few profiles which typically invest or park a lot of funds in multi-asset and more hybrid and balance advantage kind of categories. And by virtue, the way the fund is constructed, this is pretty conservative approach because the equity composition, and you can choose your equity composition, right? You can choose funds which are a little conservative on equity. Equity will be 25 to 50. That's the band typically. There are very few funds who go above 50 on equity, right? So you can typically figure out a fund which is a little low on equity and gives you a very good mix of fixed income and gold in the portfolio. Okay. And other than gold, you get silver, sometimes you get REITs, InvITs. There are multi-asset funds which have some international allocation also. So there is a good basket and a good mix which you get. And it's for more conservative, retired kind of profiles. For someone who is very aggressive, young, wanting to take chances, I would not say multi-asset can be a great part of the portfolio.
So with that caveat, Mohit, what are your favorite funds in the category? Not a recommendation, but what do you look at closely?
Look, we typically like DSP multi-asset fund. We like Nippon multi-asset. We like Pru ICICI multi-asset. White Oak of late has been doing pretty well because of the commodity allocation, as I mentioned you. But yeah, those were the three choices which I mentioned. I think are the ones which like.
Okay. All right. On that note, Mohit, thanks so much for joining me. Always a pleasure having you on the program. We've discussed both your short-term as well as your long-term needs on this program so far. By the way, if you've got specific questions about how to manage your money or money hacks that you want to know about, write to us in the comment section and we'll take it up. Do stay tuned. This is NDTV Profit.